Hello everyone and welcome to another Nature Life Online. My name is Cristina and I'm going to be your host for today. Now, if you are new to these shows, Nature Life Online are a way to bring the Natural History Museum in London, its scientists and its collections to your home where we can physically be there at the moment. Now, we invite scientists that work behind the scenes to talk about the work, the collections they look after, and the amazing specimens that they study. And we take them straight to your homes. Now, these shows are live, which means that you can send us your questions throughout the show if you have any, and please don't be shy, do have questions, and we'll try to get through as many questions as possible during the show. Now, today, we are going to be talking about early humans that live in the British Isles between 20 and 12,000 years ago. And since I'm not an expert on that, I've invited one of our amazing scientists to talk about them. We have with us paleoanthropologist Silvia Bello. I'm going to say hello to her. Hi, Sylvia.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Welcome so much to the show, and thank you so much for joining us. Really, really excited about this show. I think you've got so many stories ready for us. But before we start talking about these early humans, can you tell us a little bit more about what's your role at the Natural History Museum?
I work at the Natural History Museum in the Center of Human Evolution Research, where we try to understand what humans were doing in the past. Particularly, I work on bones, bones on human and bones or any other mammal, human or mammal, to try to understand what people were doing with these bones or antler or teeth, to see how they were butchering, so their diet, to see how they were transforming bones in bone tool. And when these modifications are on human bones, particularly, we can talk about cannibalism or some form of ritualistic behavior that was developed in the past.
Brilliant. Now, Sylvia, we are going to be talking about a particular culture of humans, of early humans, called the Magdalenians. Now, can you tell us a little bit more about them? Give us a bit of an introduction of who were they,
sure.
where did, and when?
So they were living about 20,000 up to 12,000 years before present. They were people like us, genetically speaking. They were wearing dress. They were living across Europe, probably part of Germany. You can see here, France, Spain, Italy. But at the time, the climate was still very cold. We're still the last ice age, as it's called. Therefore, most of the Scandinavia, Russia were still covered by a big ice cap, which didn't allow any occupation or migration in this area. They, as you can see here, a nice picture representing them, the artistic behavior, because, well, as the title says, they were artistic, maybe not as good as the one presented in this photo, the drawing rather. But yes, they have their own behavior, which is quite specific and quite peculiar in some ways.
And we're going to be talking about that, their habits and what they like doing in the free time during the show today. Now, Sylvia, you've mentioned that they live across Europe, not too far north because of how cold it was then, but the Magdalenians did get to the British Isles, didn't they?
Yes, they managed to go first, the first British island, so Jersey, the Channel Island, very close to France, where they probably arrived via a corridor across France. Obviously, the Jersey was linked to the rest of the continent because because of the temperature, the sea level was lower compared to now, and England, well, the UK was linked to the rest of the continent. There wasn't the Channel. There was something called the Channel River, or big Thames here, and in this case, they managed to reach across mainland Britain only via the east, probably the Netherlands or Belgium, and they occupied this area around 14,000 during a very short time when the weather seems to improve a little bit, so they could come across and occupy two areas, well, probably more, but we have evidence in Cresswell Crag and Goff's Cave, so the Somerset and Derbyshire, of their arrival in in UK. However, the weather got worse again, and so this population actually emigrate, go back to UK or got extinct, and they're not what the present day British are. They didn't come from them.
That's brilliant. So we can't just say the British ancestors, it's just a population that came in and maybe left or disappeared. That's amazing. Sylvia, I think you've already given us a good overview of how they live there, but can you tell us a little bit more of how those areas look back then? What sort of animals live there? What sort of environment would those different groups of people lived in?
So as I said, it was a perfect picture to show it. So it was color, there wasn't less vegetation, more lower trees, similar to Scandinavia with cooler winter, possibly slightly cooler summer, a bit drier possibly, but definitely colder. As you've seen from the geographic, Britain was connected to the rest of Europe. At the same time, Jersey, so these islands, were connected to the rest of France. For example, the site we are going to talk about, Les Varines, which at the moment is 30 meters above sea level, at the time was actually over 100 meters over sea level, much higher up. The sea was farther away compared to where it is now because of the climate, meaning that the sea level was lower. So quite different from what it is now, both geographically and from the point of view of the climate.
That's brilliant. Now, in that environment, in that world that they were living in, the Magdalenians develop a very artistic side. We're going to be talking a little bit about that. We have very examples of the early ones that were incredible, but the ones that you have been studied, the ones that have appeared in the British Isles are slightly different to these representations, aren't they? Can you tell us a little bit more about the artistic behaviors of the
yes.
British? The Magdalenians from the British Isles.
So before, there are two periods where artistic behavior was very developed, and everybody can think of Lascaux Cave with this beautiful painting, cave painting. This is a bit earlier. What we have in the British Island is a bit less flamboyant, I had to say, but still quite pretty in its own way. In Creswell Craig, we have some engraving, but what we're talking today is just the example that we collect in Jersey and Goff's Cave. So in the case of Jersey, we found 10 fragments of stone, which were very flat and were engraved with very simple line. And you have the example here on the right. This is the most complete of the fragment we found. It was actually found in two pieces, and they were being put together, and there was possibly another fragment that is missing. And what is interesting from my point of view is that clear cut, really crack, which was produced probably soon after the engraving was produced. The one on the left is a radius. The radius is this part of the arm of a human being. This is from Goff's Cave. The individual in this case was butchered, which in other words was cannibalized. All the meat fleshed. And then there was a sort of a pose during this process. The bone, which was partially cleaned by any soft tissue at the moment, it was engraved by this gentle zigzagging that you can see there, which is another typical engraving for the Magdalenian period. And then after the engraving was made, and you can see that it just reached the edge of the radius, the radius was broken, and then the part which are inside, which is the bone marrow, was extracted and probably eaten as well. So different design, different raw materials, so bone and stone, but a similar pattern, so symbolic engraving, and then breakage of the object.
Brilliant. So I think we've already seen a pattern there, because I think that's one of the things that these objects tell us. Sylvia, you were saying that after they had been engraved as well, something happened to them. They weren't just put in a nice place to be admired, right? So this is something that tells us a little bit more about what art meant for these early humans. Is that right?
Well, yes, I think this is different from our idea of art. For us, art is very often a beautiful object that we expose or we go to museum to see, and the object itself is the manifestation of the art. In the case of the Magdalenian, the objects were engraved and then they were broken and they were left behind. So we think that the art of engraving in this case was the artistic expression rather than the object at the end. So they were enjoying the moment of doing the engraving, working on the object, and then the object itself was broken. A bit the difference between a nice painting and a ballet. So they were sort of ballet type of people where they were producing something, they were finding enjoyment possibly in doing so, and then breaking the object, and that the moment of art, the artistic moment, ended there.
There you go. We're going to keep talking about that artistic behavior and what it meant in a minute. But Sylvia, I want to say we're already getting some questions from our viewers. I want to remind everyone that you can ask questions throughout. We had a great question from Jana. They're asking, how do you know that it was butchered? So the radius. I'm not going to ask you just that yet. So I'm going to put it on hold there because we are going to be talking about that now, about how do we know that it was butchered in a minute. We're going to stick to art for a little bit and then we'll get back to that. So Jana, please stay with us because I'm definitely asking that question. But if anyone has, send them through and we'll get them through as many as possible during the show. Now, let's go back to that plaquette, Sylvia, because what we can see there, I'm sure you have your expert eye and you can see it, but we can see loads of there. So what does this plaquette tell us? What did you find in it?
So this not only is the most complete, as you can see, it's probably all in there, is also the most engraved. When we could study them, we were doing a study by layer, and we're trying to see which were the first one to be made, and then on and on until the last one, and they were made in pattern. So the first pattern was very straight line that you can possibly see going across the screen, and then vertical line, so all straight line intersecting each other. And then the most common one, there was this circular one going all around the plaquette, and then even deeper one that was seemingly suggest that there are some shapes, some form. And this is something that we see across the Magdalenian as well, the presence of straight line and curved line. And what we know is that curved line may represent some zoomorphic representation. So we were trying to see what this line can represent if there is any zoomorphic, which means representation of animal on this plaquette. We came to some conclusion, although it's not absolute, because whatever it is very, very simple, very stylized. So this, if you superpose, we didn't make it up, is some of these lines seems to indicate the shape of a bobbit on his left side, the bull, which is one of the typical example of Magdalenian art. We also found some very, very curved line that suggests possible mammoth. Again, I know that it's not the most beautiful mammoth, but we can expect that it could be the back of the mammoth with this long tusk. And then the very complex one that you can see in the middle could possibly be a human face on its front sides, which again is something that was seen as well as Castle Prague. There is some image, possible human image, but there's also been found in Spain and France, sorry. So it's not uncommon, but again, they're not probably, impressed the audience with the beautiful cave painting, and then we have these quite strange zoomorphic of human-like design, which are not the prettiest, I have to admit.
Now, Sylvia, you say that they might not be the most beautiful, but I see that mammoth and that bobbit and that face, and it sends shivers down my spine because it has so much story behind it, and the fact that you just go there, find it, and then start. I think it's you've called it before a detective work. You actually look at it and start abstracting and taking what was going on those people without actually being there, without actually being able to travel time.
The other thing is that very often we imagine the artistic product as the best one. We, as I say, last call, we have the complete product, which is the most beautiful one. But there is all a training process, which is is one of the things that actually disappears in archaeology. All the work of children is not recognized. It's very difficult to see, but there is a learning curve in any process, and possibly these were just practice. They were not the ultimate beautiful project, but they were just something they were practiced to reach that point. And the fact that there is this superposition of line can also be, whoever had a child know that the first thing is a lot of vertical line. This is what my son did it. And then only after a certain time and painful line, there was some circular and more curve, which is actually how you learn to write. And here we see more or less the same thing. We see the straight line, which are the easiest to produce at the bottom, and then on top, more complex line until we can see something more zoomorph. So it's sort to see as well a sort of learning curve, learning process with this plaquette.
That's really beautiful. Honestly, I just have to say that every time I hear this story, it really excites me. I think it's really great to see that practice and find out that from a plaquette that you've told me something this big is not.
It's very small. It's very, very small, and all the other fragments are, they are small fragments. I think the biggest has this kind of shape is 10 centimeters long. It's really not. They're really not big, and that's why we also thought that they were all those lines. One of the questions cannot just be simple cutting board. Because of their size, they're so small, it's very difficult to imagine that they were using something so small and so smooth and very well prepared to do some practical work. They could have done it somewhere else. And also these lines don't seem to suggest any practical use, but something a little bit more unuseful, so artistic. That's why we say artistic, not to say that artists are unuseful, but it's to say that it didn't seem to have a purpose, those lines. It was for the pure joy of made them in some way.
Sylvia, that was my next question. It is something that has come through our viewers as well. So, for example, Chris was asking, how do we know that it's art and not a part of a ritual, for example? And Rebecca was asking, maybe it was a ritual, a gift to the gods, perhaps. So what are the theories behind it? And can you tell us a little bit more about how do we know it was art?
As I said, we suspect it is art because there is no minimum purpose for those lines. They were made for, as I said, we can recognize some animals, so they were just made to depict something beautiful. It could be, what they saw during the day, or what they did, what they would like to find to hunt the next day. Who knows? The other thing is that, as I said, they're very small, so therefore they're not. It's difficult to imagine they were used for anything else. To push it over and say maybe some behavior, some ritualistic act with this plaquette is difficult to tell. They were found in a very, very domestic near the fire pit. So it's a very, very domestic environment rather than a more ritualistic. And this is also something we find as a constant in the Magdalenian period, a very close association of everyday life, I would say, with this more artistic object that we found. So the link is very close between what they were doing every day and this artistic behavior.
Mm-hmm. And then, as you said before, Sylvia, what they consider art wasn't so much the plaquette itself, but the action of...
The act, yes.
The act of engraving
producing it. Yeah.
Absolutely. Now, we're going to be talking a little bit more about rituals and so on. But I know as a few, we've got so many questions coming through, really great questions. So a couple of questions have asked, where would the plaquettes found? Where was that particular plaquette found? That was Jersey, wasn't it, Sylvia?
Yes, so we found them in Jersey, so in the Channel Island, on a hill with perfect viewpoint. The site is quite large, so they were distributed across the site, but they were mainly close to these herds, so a more domestic environment rather than something more specific. They were, as I said, they were scattered, so they were broken and dispersed. So it doesn't seem they were collecting them all in one corner, although they were over 20,000 years old, so it's possible that they moved as well. It was found in an agricultural field, so again, and on a pen, so they moved downhill. But there didn't seem to be a specific niche or area for them. They were very much in the area occupied by the people at the time.
Mm-hmm. And another question from Jana again. Why do we assume that it was a children? Do we assume that it was a children? I think.
Oh no, that was just my interpretation. That is a learning curve, so we can't tell that it was a children making them. But we always assume that they're adult. We always assume that there is a man adult doing art. As the picture showed, there are two men doing this beautiful cave paint. It's not necessarily that. We have to think a bit beyond what the image has been proposed and suggested to us until now. It could have been a woman depicting, it could have been a child practicing. It's just trying to go beyond the boundary, so we can't tell which one it is, but we should not assume it was an adult male.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Sylvia. And Tanya as well is commenting something as well. This is a little bit more philosophical, but I wanted to throw it to you. They were saying, isn't art also a manifestation of some sort of ritual? So how was the difference between art and a ritual? Is there something there?
Okay, so if we go to cave in this case, I think in that case, art and ritual are very close. It's difficult to say for the plaquette, because again, there is this idea that if you draw a mammoth is to hope that you will find the mammoth or meat. But this is a way that has been discussed and there's no really proof. But for Ghost Cave, we have a human bone that was butchered. And then I remember there was a question about how can we tell they were butchered. So Ghost Cave, there is a cannibalistic behavior going on there. So they were eating this individual. Actually, we have the eaten one, so the one that has been modified. But during this process, during eating one specific individual, we have this radius, which is this bone, which was completely defleshed, clean of every soft tissue that was probably eaten at some point, all the meat. And then normally what they would do is breaking the bone to extract the bone marrow. By this phase, there's been a sort of a pause, and before breaking the bone was engraved with this zigzagging. So for me, that is not just an artistic moment, but it's a specific when it was made, that seems to be part of a much more cultural and complex burial, ritualistic behavior, where the the bone was engraved, and we can't tell for what reason specifically. We can see here to produce this nice zigzagging, which is a typical motif in Magdalenian culture. And it was on the bone that after the engraving was then broken to extract the bone marrow. So sort of a pose during something that is, again, quite strongly ritualistic, a cannibalistic behavior.
Brilliant. And I think, Sylvia, we've moved on straight into the cannibalistic behavior of the Magdalenians. I think that everything is very interlinked, isn't it, on these two aspects? And as we said before, ritual and art is really close in here. So let's talk a little bit more about that. I think you've already given us a very good idea of it. But can you tell us a little bit more about how we know how do we know they were cannibals? What kind of like objects do we have to tell us about it, and how do we know?
So we actually don't know if they were the cannibal, but they were definitely the cannibalized, those were eaten. So we have about 6 individuals, all ages, 3 years old, which is that very small skull in the middle, up to a couple of older adults and possibly an older one. And every single human fragment, almost every single human fragment, has been modified with what we call cut marks, which are scratches, very thin scratches, similar to the engraving that we've seen on the bone. You can see an SEM image here at the bottom left, or other images in the middle. So these scratches indicate that the soft tissue were detached from the individual, from the bone. The bone was separated, so it was dismembered. And then when the bone was clean of every tissue, they were then broken. And you have an example on the right where the bone was broken to extract the bone marrow. So up to here, you can actually say they were definitely cleaned of the soft tissue, but were they actually eaten? And the final proof, I think, was in collaboration with a team from Spain who helped us to recognize human tooth marks on human bones. And we have an example here of a rib, a human rib, that it was peeled. So you can see there is some of the cortical bone is missing. It's because it was chewed, like sort of barbecue attitude. And you have some fingers at the bottom, ABC, fingers and toes bone that were actually chewed, the end were chewed to extract grease from the inside of the bone. And this pattern, having human tooth mark on human bone, I think is the ultimate proof that these individuals were actually eaten at some point. I know your next question is, were they really hungry or did they do something? and that's when the engraving radius and also the skull, as you have noticed, they have a very strange shape. They are not broken in hundreds of pieces. They maintain this cup, and that's because they produce in skull cup, so a sort of bowl that could contain something. So, which have been found elsewhere during the Magdalenian, in other sites in France. So all these things put together, I think, is an indication that they were, yes, those individuals were eaten, but they could have been part of a ritualistic behavior, so their own way to dispose of that body rather than just being very hungry.
Brilliant, Sylvia. That's excellent. Now, we had a question from Ben, which is actually a good question. You've talked about tooth marks, marks of the bones being butchered, or the meat had been taken from it, or the bone marrow being extracted from it. So Ben is asking, the zigzag marks that we could see in the radius before, couldn't they be marks of them cutting the meat and cutting the bones with a rough knife? And I think that's when the amazing research and the methods that you've been using at the Natural History Museum come in play, right? How do you tell apart a biting mark, a cutting mark, or something that's actually been done?
We have never seen marks. You know, when you see a lot of cut marks, you kind of have to get an eye for those. And these marks have a pattern that we haven't seen very often. So it could have been filleting marks, where you hold the bone and you just zigzag to try to detach, but they're not quite in the right place. That's the first thing. The other thing, they were produced with a different technique, a sort of a scraping and then zigzagging and then scraping, and then again, which was a sort of a pattern. And then I did something really crazy. I think I measured them. I measured them all, and I measured all cut marks I found on the human bone. And I also measured some on the animal. I measured more than 600 of these modifications, thanks to a machine that we have at the museum. I think we have a photo of it, the Alicona, which allowed to measure surface modifications. So we can, this is the one. So with reconstruction of your surface in 3D, and it helps you to measure the depth, the angle of how these marks were made. So after measuring all these marks, it took a long time, them together, and these zigzagging marks are morphometrically very different from any other butchering marks that we have, either on human or on animal in Goff's Cave. Non-human animal. And that tells us that they are different, and they were probably not made with a purpose of filleting, so artistic.
Brilliant. So yeah, different methods at the museum. You've shown up the Alicona microscope, which creates these amazing 3D images. You've been using all the different imaging techniques that we have at the museum, haven't you, Sylvia?
Yes, I mean, we are really lucky at the museum to have all these facilities, the expert and the mammal collection all in one place, which allow to do our amazing science. If they were not together, we won't be able to do it. So we have the Alicona, the Natural History Museum is the only one, but there are two scientific institutions in all UK to have it, so we are extremely lucky. The other one is a more conventional one that everybody uses, called the SEM, and it does very detailed images, black and white. No, we can't measure but the resolution is extremely high. And here, for example, you have the radius I was just talking about, showing the details of the engraving. And then when we want to know more about the bone, we just use the CT scan. Again, another amazing machine I'm not very good at, but learning, that tells us how the bone was inside. So you can also see the modification across through the bone rather than just on the surface. And it is really special that all these machines are present, and we have been helped by the expert to use them. And the proximity between the expert, the machine, and the bones is absolutely essential to get this result, I think.
I think it's amazing how you put all this thing together. You put the expert knowledge, your knowledge, Sylvia, together with these different methods and machines that we have, and then you can reconstruct what was going on 12,000, 13,000 million, sorry, not millions, 12,000 years ago.
Yeah.
It's closer to us. And kind of build up how these early, these humans that were like us were living back then, and that's incredible. Now, Sylvia, we had a couple of other questions coming from our audience. Tito is asking, why the name Magdalenians? What does Magdalenians come from?
I'm not sure. I think it could be the name of a state, and in France probably that was then given the name. I'm not 100% sure.
And I think it goes that way. It normally goes that way. So it's just the area, and then you just call everyone the same way. A bit like
it's because they represent a culture. So all is not the people itself. Is the people who live that particular culture. They were and very mainly dependent on the ecological culture. So how they were producing stone tools. So that's the one that get the name first. Is the typical stone tool technology that is called the Magdalenian, and then the people who were doing it, they become the Magdalenians. But why the Magdalene? I think there is a site somewhere in France, but I'm not sure.
But I think what you're saying is the important thing is the culture of the area. At that point, any other early Homo sapiens, early humans like us, but they were all across different sites of Europe, and it's the culture that represents all of them, isn't it?
Yes, they kind of give an idea, and then of the time frame. So obviously it's a succession of culture that they go with the time as well, and each culture seems to have its own characteristic that allowed you to distinguish it from a previous and a successive one.
That's brilliant. And again, it just takes me back in time. It makes me think about how they were living and how they were having these rituals. Now, Sylvia, we get into the end of the show. I'm going to remind our audience that if you have any questions, send them through so we can ask them to Sylvia before we finish. In fact, we have a question from Jana. Actually, this question is really good. Can you recommend more literature about this? So Jana is doing an MA, a master's, and I would love to read more about it. And I think there's loads, isn't there?
Yes, there is loads. The Naturalistic Museum, the people working at the Naturalistic Museum have one. Can I show it? This is from the Naturalistic Museum. From Cristina and from Dennis. So Britain, 1 million years of the human history. So it's a very nice book with nice images, and you have all that. But and from there you can find literature and references, and there are really a lot of interesting books as a starting point, and then you go to other interesting book, and then even go to the scientific paper that describe that. Maybe a little bit more boring, but they could be really, really good. And very often just by Googling, in a way, some keywords like Magdalenian, like skull cups, like engraving, you can find very interesting paper to read at different level of specialization, which are really good to do.
And what I'll say, I'll add to that, Sylvia, is that hopefully we'll get you into more of these shows in the future. So come back to us, and we'll hear more. And also your colleague, Sylvia. Now, before we finish, Sylvia, I really, really wanted to ask you, what comes next after finding out these amazing things, finding out about the plaquettes, finding out about the engraved bones? what is next in your line of work? What is the next big project?
So well, it's a secret. You keep it for yourself, okay? So the jersey is not finished. We still have, so we published the first paper, which was on the plaquette, but the all sides need to be published by Chantal Connor, Het Blinkhorn. There's a big group of people working on it. I was just working on the engraved things, but they are the expert of the all site. So there is more to do on that. And from my part, there is also some mysterious stone again from Jersey that they're not engraved. They are a bit different. I can't tell you more, but they definitely deserve some more detective looking again with at the museum. For Goff's Cave, even more exciting is trying to do ancient DNA on the bone, and then we actually have a PhD student and in collaboration with Selena Brace and Jan Barnes working on the DNA of these bones, of this individual, to try to say something more about the living individual this time, not just the ritual, but about what they were looking, if they were female, male, if they have any pathology. And if we have a specific, we can still try to see if we can tell something about being cannibal or cannibalized, if they were a family group. So a lot of things going on at the moment to know a bit more of the living people before they were cannibalized, and to extend that with the other Magdalenian bones across Europe. That will be sort of a dream that not straight away, but in the future we hope to develop.
Mm-hmm. So now that you've done all the detective work on the different specimens that you found, you're going inside and trying to get some more information from the ancient DNA that they might still have there.
Yeah, well, Goff's case is a Pandora box. Every time you look in the drawing, you always find something new. So we redescribed some of the baton, which were these interesting. You actually had it in the title. That was one of the baton found in Goff's cave, perforated baton. We still don't know exactly what they were used for, but I think that our analysis get a better idea. There is some other engraved specimen there that we want to study. There are some bone tools that we just finished studying. So yes, museum collections have this advantage that the more you look, the more you find. And with the machine we have now, you can even find more of what we were expecting. So is it a constant work? It's not because specimens reach the museum that then they stay in drawer. They're not just stored there, but they are regularly studied. And that is what bring up to science. And also, every year there are new discoveries, so things that we were not seeing before, we can now say, oh, look, it's very similar. Let's see if we can study the same thing in our collection. So you go back to your collection. And Goff's Cave is one of these collections, has been amazing. And, I always feel that I talk about Goff's Cave, but it's such an amazing collection that is the pity not talking about Goff's Cave.
That's really beautiful, Sylvia. That feeling of even though you find out things and you find new things, there's still so much still to find out, and new technologies, new techniques bring that new knowledge. That means that the collections are always relevant. So yeah, thank you so much. That was beautiful. Now, Sylvia, sadly, we've got to the end of the show, but it's been a pleasure having you here, discovering more about the Magdalenians and the Magdalenians of the British Isles. I think we all live in this show feeling that we know them a little bit more like our own family. So hopefully, yeah, got that feeling as well. But we're going to say goodbye to you now, Sylvia, but hopefully you'll join us again in the future.
Thank you. It was really good fun. Speak to you soon.
Bye. And thank you so much as well to all of you for being there, watching and sharing your questions with us. You send us excellent questions, and I really, really enjoyed getting the answers from Sylvia. Now, that is all from today, but we've got another show coming up next Friday. We'll be kicking off National Tree Week, and we'll be talking about some amazing ancient trees that we thought weren't around anymore, and then we rediscovered. But just to let you all know, today and Friday will be the last Nature Life Online shows of the year. We'll be having a break during December and coming back in the new year with more content, more stories, and bringing the Natural History Museum to you, to your homes. In the meantime, If you want to know more about the Natural History Museum, what goes behind the scenes, what our scientists work on, please check out our playlist, a Nature Life Online playlist on the YouTube channel, where you will be able to find all the Nature Life Online that we've done throughout the year. And in the meantime, we'll see you next Friday. Hopefully you'll join us again. So bye. That's all from me. Bye and see you then.